Everyone thought my husband was just a brilliant writer, but no one knew he kept a woman locked in our attic for 30 years. Each night, the lighthouse still flashed. Not for the ships at sea, but for a soul trapped in the dark, sending out her final cry for help. The Maine coastline shimmered pale under a veil of mist that smelled faintly of salt and old pine. Nora Hale stood by the wide bay window of her seaside home, coffee steaming between her palms, watching the lighthouse beam blink against the dawn. Every flash painted the living room walls silver, like memories surfacing from sleep. Her husband, Professor Daniel Hale, was already gone, leaving his usual neat note on the counter lecture at Bowdoin. Back after dark. His handwriting was tidy, decisive, just like him. The house felt heavier when he wasn't there, filled with echoes of waves and unfinished conversations. Nora pushed back a lock of auburn hair, deciding today she'd finally scrub the salt stains from the windows and chase the lingering smell of mildew that came with autumn tides. But then her phone buzzed. "Mrs. Hale?" "This is Kayla," said a bright, nervous voice. "The cleaning ad I can come today if you still need help." Nora smiled. Kayla Brooks. 22 art student working part-time to pay tuition. She'd helped before, careful and polite. "Yes, Kayla. Come by around 10. The sea will behave better if someone else does the cleaning." Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the dock and the cedar steps. Seagulls cried like warning bells from another world. Nora felt that familiar unease again, the way the house sometimes listened when she was alone. Still, she grabbed her gloves, humming an old folk tune. "Just the wind," she whispered, though she didn't quite believe it, when the lighthouse beam swept once more across the window. For the briefest second, a shadow, long, thin, unmistakably human, moved across the upstairs landing, and Nora froze. The morning passed quietly at first. The fog lifted into a pale blue sky, and Nora's laughter mixed with the hum of a cleaning vacuum. Kayla had arrived on time, cheerful with a messy bun and earbuds dangling from her neck. She moved lightly from room to room, wiping shelves, humming to herself. By noon, Nora had left for a short errand in town coffee with an old friend, nothing unusual. The ocean breeze followed her car down the hill. She was halfway through the second sip of her cappuccino when her phone vibrated. Kayla. At first, only silence. Then came a breath, quick, uneven. Mrs. Hale, the young woman, whispered, her voice trembling, "Please tell me. Is there anyone else in the house right now?" Nora's heart stuttered. "No," she said slowly, setting the cup down. "Why do you ask?" A pause, then words barely audible. "Because there's someone upstairs." The cafe's soft music blurred into white noise. Nora stood so fast her chair scraped. "Kayla, listen to me. What did you see?" She was standing in the hallway," Kayla stammered. "White raincoat. Long hair wet. She just turned and walked into the last room. I thought maybe you came back. I didn't. Then who is she?" Nora's hands shook as she threw money on the table. "Kayla, get out. Lock the door. Go outside and wait for me." On the other end, the phone crackled, followed by a sharp gasp, and then nothing but static. The connection died. Nora bolted for the car tires, screeching against the cobblestones, her reflection flashing in the rearview mirror like a ghost. The lighthouse beam cut across the road ahead, its pulse slower, heavier, like a warning from the sea itself. By the time Nora's car skidded into the gravel driveway, red and blue lights flashed across the damp white walls of the house. 2 police cruisers stood out front doors, open radios murmuring. Kayla sat hunched on the porch steps, her knees pulled to her chest, her face chalk white. Nora rushed to her. "Kayla, are you hurt?" The girl shook her head, eyes wide, pupils trembling. "She was there," she whispered. "I swear it." On the landing, she looked straight at me. Then she disappeared. Before Nora could answer, Officer Darby, broad-shouldered and calm, stepped out of the house. "Mrs. Hale, we checked every room. Attic, basement, closets. No one's here. All windows locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry." Nora's breath came shallow. The scent of sea salt drifted in through the open door, sharp metallic. But she saw someone, Nora insisted, gesturing to Kayla. White coat, dripping wet. Darby exchanged a knowing glance with his partner. Old houses like this play tricks. Reflection fog, coastal light, bends weird. Nora forced a smile, but inside the explanation sat wrong. The house wasn't built for tricks. It was built for secrets. An engine hummed down the drive. Daniel's gray sedan appeared through the fog. He stepped out, immaculate as ever, the faintest smile tugging at his lips when he saw the police. "What on earth happened?" Nora told him quickly, her voice shaking. Daniel listened, then chuckled softly. "Honey, you let your imagination sail too far. Fog, glass nerves. Kayla probably saw a reflection." Kayla flinched, hugging herself tighter. Nora stared at Daniel. His calm, his dismissive ease, and for the first time in their 12-year marriage, something cold slid between them. That night, the house seemed to breathe differently. The ocean wind pressed against the windows, making them hum with low, ghostly tones. Daniel slept soundly beside her, his steady breathing blending with the waves outside. But Nora lay wide awake, eyes open to the shifting patterns of moonlight crawling across the ceiling. Then it came a soft scrape, like a chair dragging muffled by old wood. Then another, slow, deliberate, just above her head. The attic. Nora held her breath. Every instinct begged her to stay still, but the sound returned this time, accompanied by the faintest tap, 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 irregular and fragile, like knuckles brushing the floorboards. She slid out of bed. The boards under her feet were ice cold. The old house creaked in protest as she tiptoed toward the hallway, flashlight trembling in her hand. The beam cut through darkness, revealing framed photographs, her wedding Daniel, signing his first book contract, a life that suddenly felt like fiction. At the end of the hall, the pull-string door to the attic swayed slightly, though no draft touched it. Nora aimed the light upward. The old lock latched from the outside, glimmered faintly with condensation. Her voice came out as a whisper, barely hers. "Is someone up there?" Only silence. Then just as she took a step back, a droplet of water fell from the ceiling, splashing against her wrist, icy tasting of salt. She stumbled away, heart pounding. The house fell still again, but the smell of seawater lingered, crawling down from the ceiling beams. Nora shut her eyes, gripping the railing. Fog, wind, imagination, she told herself. But deep down, she knew this was no trick of air or light. Something upstairs had moved. Morning brought no peace. The sky was a washed-out gray, the kind that made the ocean and the clouds melt into one endless sheet of silver. Nora moved through the house, barefoot, coffee untouched, tracing the strange damp chill that hadn't left since the night before. At the foot of the attic stairs, she stopped. The air smelled faintly of salt and rust. A thin trail of water stains streaked down the wooden steps, each mark shaped like something had dripped, paused, then dripped again. She crouched, touching the stain. It was sticky, briny, seawater. Her throat tightened. The attic was locked from the outside. Nothing should move up there. Still, something had. When Daniel appeared behind her, his voice was smooth, careful. "You're up early." "What are you doing?" Crouched on the floor. Nora straightened, hiding her shaking hand. "There's moisture coming from the ceiling. I think we've got a leak." He leaned against the wall, studying her. Old wood coastal air, it sweats sometimes. He smiled thinly. "You're worrying again." She said nothing. Daniel brushed past, whistling lightly, and went downstairs. But when Nora followed, something else caught her eye, Her towel hung on the bathroom rack, still damp. The scent of her lavender soap mixed with the unmistakable tang of salt. In the kitchen, she opened the fridge and froze. The package of spicy sausage she'd bought yesterday was open, a jagged piece missing. Daniel hated anything spicy. Even the smell made him cough. "Did you eat some of this?" she asked carefully. He looked up from the newspaper, eyebrows lifted. "Thought I'd give it another try. Guess I'm developing a new taste." His tone was casual, but something in his eyes, something flat, made her stomach turn. When he left for campus, Nora stood alone in the silence. She took out a notebook, the one she used for grocery lists, and began to write. Night 1, sounds in attic. Door locked. Salt water drops. Morning trail downstairs, towel wet, missing food. Husband says old wood reflections. She paused, then underlined a final note in red ink. Daniel lied about the sausage. Outside, the foghorn bellowed from the harbor, long, mournful, as if warning her not to stop writing. And as the echo rolled through the house, she realized the damp wasn't gone. It was spreading, breathing through the walls like the sea itself had found a way inside. That afternoon, the sea wind carried whispers all the way down the lane. Nora stopped by the fence of old Mr. McKenna, her widowed neighbor, who had lived by the harbor longer than anyone. He leaned on his porch railing, a wool cap, tugged low eyes, squinting against the glare off the water. "Morning." "Nora," he greeted, voice rough with salt and age. "You and the professor been burning the midnight oil again." She frowned. "Why do you ask?" He chuckled, pointing his pipe toward her roofline. "Saw your attic light on past 2 last night. Strange thing, since that window's been boarded since forever. Looked like someone pacing. Up, down, up again." Nora's breath hitched. "You're sure it wasn't the reflection from the lighthouse?" McKenna shook his head. "No, ma'am. The beam swings east, not over your roof. Been staring at that lighthouse 40 years. I know her rhythm." His words clung to Nora's mind as she walked back up the gravel path. The lighthouse rhythm measured steady, never random, just like Daniel's excuses. Inside, she climbed to the breaker box, fingers trembling. She flipped through each labeled switch. The attic circuit lighthouse room, 2, attic lamp was marked disabled in Daniel's handwriting, sealed with black tape. Yet last night, someone had turned it on. The tape was peeled back at the corner, fresh adhesive marks glinting under the light. Nora stood there, the house silent, except for the sigh of the tide beneath the cliffs. She could almost feel it breathing through the floorboards. She whispered to herself, "Then who's up there? Keeping the light alive?" Far away. The foghorn moaned again. 3 long notes that sounded like a message no one had yet decoded. The fog returned that night, thick and ghost-colored, swallowing the horizon where the ocean met the sky. Nora couldn't sleep. The notebook from earlier sat open beside her on the nightstand, a line half-written. If the light was on, someone wanted to be seen. She rose quietly so Daniel wouldn't stir. He had fallen asleep at his desk downstairs, a half-finished manuscript glowing on the laptop screen. The steady blue light flickered over his face, serene, almost too calm. Nora slipped outside, robe tied tight, flashlight in hand. The air was wet and cold enough to sting her throat. The waves crashed far below, invisible under the mist. Every few seconds, the distant lighthouse blinked once, cutting a white scar through the gray. Then she heard it. Tap, 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 tap. Metal against metal. Weak but deliberate. Coming from the vent that led up to the attic. She froze, heart thrumming. The rhythm came again, clearer, echoing through the fog. Tap, 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 tap. Her mind scrambled to match the pattern. She'd grown up with a father who served in the Coast Guard. He used to teach her simple Morse code. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. Dear God, Nora whispered. The sound paused, then repeated, desperate, uneven, as though whoever was sending it had grown weak. She stepped closer to the side of the house, boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. The flashlight beam trembled as she aimed it at the upper window. For a fleeting second, she saw it a silhouette behind the circular glass of the attic's porthole window, motionless, watching her. Then the light blinked out. Nora gasped and stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the slick grass. Her flashlight clattered to the ground. The beam rolled, slicing through fog, catching a flash of something, a handprint. Pale, wet, pressed against the inside of the attic glass. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Daniel, she shouted instinctively, but the name vanished into the fog absorbed by the night. She waited, but no response came from inside the house. She forced herself to breathe, counting each inhale. The tap returned once more, faint and irregular now, like a dying heartbeat. Back inside, she locked every door, every window, her fingers trembling so violently she nearly dropped the keys. Then she stood at the base of the staircase, staring up toward the ceiling where the attic hatch loomed. The air above was colder, heavy. The faint drip of water fell from somewhere unseen, landing on the floorboards with steady rhythm. In the silence that followed, she could almost hear the ocean breathing through the house's bones. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a message from Daniel. Heading back to campus library. Don't wait up. Nora stared at the screen, her reflection fractured in the cracked glass. Outside, the foghorn groaned 3 times. Inside, the attic creaked once, and from above the ceiling, a faint whisper, too soft to be wind, slipped through the vent. Help. Me. Morning sunlight filtered weakly through the lace curtains, cutting thin gold stripes across Daniel's study. The smell of paper and old coffee hung heavy in the air. Nora entered quietly, pretending to tidy, while Daniel was away at the campus library. The desk, as always, was perfectly arranged, pens, aligned manuscripts, stacked, nothing out of place, except one drawer. The bottom left one. It was half stuck, its handle slightly crooked, like it hadn't been opened in years. Curiosity pricked her like a splinter. She knelt, tugged. It wouldn't move. Then, as she adjusted her grip, the old latch gave a sudden metallic click. The drawer slid open. Inside lay dust, a few dried ink cartridges, and buried under loose drafts, a small notebook with a worn brown leather cover. Its spine was cracked, the edges softened by years of handling. Nora lifted it carefully. The smell of salt and paper hit her again, sharp and intimate. She opened to the first page. Elegant handwriting, looping and deliberate, a woman's script. She flipped through page after page of story ideas, descriptions of harbors, storms, loneliness, light from a distant tower. Phrases glimmered with Daniel's style, no, his book's style. Whole paragraphs mirrored scenes from his best-selling novel, Echoes of the Tide. But they weren't his words. Nora's breath caught. The ink on the final page ended abruptly, mid-sentence, as though the writer had been interrupted. At the bottom corner, a signature faintly pressed Eleanor S. Her mind raced. Eleanor, Ellie Shaw. The name from Daniel's old acknowledgments, to E.S., who inspired the sea. But that was 15 years ago. Everyone said Ellie was gone, so why were her words, her voice, locked inside her husband's desk? The fog had lifted by late afternoon, leaving the house bathed in a dull, deceptive calm. But Nora couldn't shake the weight pressing behind her ribs. The name Eleanor S. circled her thoughts, like the tide coming, retreating, coming again. She carried the leather notebook to the library corner of the house, where boxes of old renovation papers gathered dust. Daniel had always said every house has bones. Ours just creaks a little louder. Now she intended to see what those bones were hiding. The blueprints were rolled and bound with brittle twine. She untied one, spreading the parchment across the dining table. The lines of the house unfurled like veins, foundation, hallway, attic stairs. But there, at the topmost corner, drawn faintly in pencil, was a room she had never seen labeled before. Lighthouse room, access seaside. Her heart jumped. The notation was old, the ink faded to a ghost gray. In the margin, stamped in official blue, was a restoration signature, Daniel Hale, 2011. She swallowed hard. Daniel wasn't just aware of the room, he'd personally sealed it. A tremor went through her fingers as she flipped to the accompanying inspection notes. Minor water damage, room closed for safety. No further access permitted. But under that, scribbled hastily in another hand, almost erased, door reinforced. Occupant Nora froze. Occupant. She stared at the word until it blurred. Then, almost on instinct, she went upstairs. The corridor was dim lit, only by the thin light of dusk slipping through the round window at the end. Her shoes creaked on each step. The attic hatch loomed above the same spot where she'd heard the tapping. She reached up and touched the edge. Her hand came away gritty, but she felt something else beneath her fingertips, carved initials. She leaned closer. E.S. The same letters as in the notebook. A chill swept through her entire body. The realization came like the sound of a wave crashing far below, loud, absolute, impossible to unhear. She backed away, breathing unevenly. Every detail she had ignored now rearranged itself into a pattern: the fog, the salt scent, the light in the sealed window. And suddenly, the name Lighthouse Room made terrible sense. The architecture was deliberate. That circular window faced the sea, directly catching the beam of Portland headlight every 40 seconds. Whoever was up there could see the flashes, could time them, could send their own signal back. Tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. SOS. The Morse rhythm replayed in her head, each beat heavier than the last. She whispered to the silence, "You've been calling for help, haven't you?" From somewhere above, the wood creaked. One long moan of timber, like the house itself, responding. Nora stepped backward down the hallway. On the wall beside her hung a framed newspaper clipping she'd seen 1,000 times before, but never truly read. It was from a decade ago, an article celebrating Daniel's first award-winning novel. The headline read, "Local Professor Finds Inspiration in Tragedy at Sea." The photograph showed Daniel smiling beside a lighthouse. The caption beneath froze her in place. "Dedicated to the memory of Eleanor Shaw, lost off the Maine coast." Her breath caught. "Lost off the coast. Declared dead." The same name, the same initials. But now those initials were carved into her ceiling. Nora turned toward the attic hatch again, a storm rising inside her chest. If Eleanor Shaw had truly been lost at sea then, who had been living above her head all these years, watching the lighthouse light and waiting for someone to listen. The clock's second hand crawled toward 2 in the morning. The house lay drowned in stillness, except for the distant murmur of the sea gnawing at the cliffs. Nora sat upright in bed, pretending to sleep. The notebook and blueprints were hidden under her pillow. Daniel had returned late, claiming he needed to grade papers. He'd smiled when he kissed her forehead, but there had been something off in that smile, like a mask that didn't fit anymore. Now, in the dark, she listened. Downstairs, a soft thud, then footsteps. Not hurried, not stealthy, measured like someone trying not to wake the ghosts. She slid out of bed, feet finding her slippers soundlessly. The hallway was dim, the air heavy with that unmistakable smell of salt and iron again. Tap. Another step. The sound came from above. Her pulse quickened. She moved toward the attic door. The beam of moonlight from the round window barely reached the ceiling, and yet she could see the hatch tremble. Then click. The lock turned. By itself. The door creaked open, and a sliver of cold air rolled down, carrying the scent of seawater, and something else, soap maybe, or damp fabric. Nora's breath hitched. A figure emerged slowly, bare feet on the wooden steps, shoulders stooped, carrying something, a porcelain plate. Daniel. Her voice broke the silence. He flinched so hard the plate slipped from his hands and shattered on the floor. For a heartbeat, they both froze, he staring at her, she staring at the broken fragments that glinted under the moonlight. "What are you doing up there?" she whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You startled me. I was just getting some research materials." From the attic at 2 a.m. He smiled thinly. When inspiration strikes, it doesn't check the clock. Nora's gaze dropped to the shards. The plate was spotless. No trace of food, no grease, not even dust freshly washed. Inspiration, she repeated softly. Or dinner, for someone else. Daniel's expression flickered just for a second. Something sharp defensive then vanished behind calm eyes. "You're overtired, Nora. Maybe don't let that cleaning girl's ghost story get to you." She didn't answer. Her flashlight left on the hall table caught the edge of something wet. A droplet of water slid from Daniel's sleeve and fell onto the floor. Salt water. He noticed her noticing. His smile froze. "I told you to sleep," he said quietly, and his voice was no longer patient. It was warning. But Nora didn't move. Behind him from the open attic hatch, she saw it just for an instant. A movement in the dark, the faintest flicker of pale fabric. Someone else was still up there. Nora stepped back, whispering, "You're not alone, are you?" Daniel's face paled. His mouth opened, then closed. He knelt, gathering the porcelain shards with trembling fingers. "Go back to bed, Nora," he said, voice breaking slightly. "Please." She didn't. She stood in the hallway long after he disappeared into his study, the air thick with brine and silence. When the clock struck 2:30, a gust of wind blew through the vent, carrying with it 3 sharp metallic knocks. Tap, 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 Nora whispered to herself. Not wind, not ghosts. She turned toward the attic door. It's her. The next morning smelled of rain and coffee gone bitter. Nora woke to the sound of drawers opening and closing. Daniel stood by the dresser, folding shirts with mechanical precision, the suitcase already half-packed. "You're leaving?" she asked. Her voice still rasped from the night's sleeplessness. He didn't look up. "Atlanta. I need a change of scenery. The publisher's waiting for the next chapters." Nora sat up slowly, the bedsheet tight around her. "You didn't mention this trip yesterday." Daniel's hands paused, just for a second. Then he zipped the suitcase and turned with a calm smile. "It came up late. Sometimes inspiration doesn't schedule itself." He stepped closer, placing his hand on her shoulder, gentle but heavy. "Listen carefully, Nora. While I'm gone, don't let anyone into the house. No visitors, no cleaning crew, especially not anyone from the publishing house." Her brow furrowed. "Mr. Sterling, why?" Daniel's grip tightened a fraction too long. "Because he'll try to distract you with gossip. Deadlines, manuscripts. He's a good editor, but a terrible storyteller." He let go, forcing another faint smile. "You understand, right? Keep things quiet." For me. The words weren't a request. They were an order. When the front door shut behind him, the house exhaled empty, yet alive, every board listening. Nora sat motionless on the bed, heart pounding with something sharper than fear, defiance. Her eyes drifted to the ceiling where faint water stains, shaped like a hand, spread across the plaster. The same pattern she'd traced before. "I'll keep it quiet," she whispered, her tone flat. Then she looked toward the attic and added softly, "Just not for you." The doorbell rang just 2 hours after Daniel's car disappeared down the coastal road. The sound sliced through the quiet like a blade. Nora hesitated, her hand hovering over the knob. Daniel's warning echoed in her head. Don't let anyone in. But through the frosted glass, she saw a tall man in a navy coat, his hair windblown, his expression impatient. Beside him stood a young woman holding a leather portfolio. She opened the door just a crack. Yes, Mrs. Hale. The man's voice was clipped but polite. Sterling, Daniel's editor. We've been trying to reach him for days. He missed 2 deadlines, and the new manuscript isn't in our system. Nora forced a smile. He just left for Atlanta this morning. He needed inspiration. Sterling's jaw tightened. Atlanta. That's odd. His phone was active here last night. He gestured toward the roof. Your neighbor said the attic light was on again. Looks like he's still working upstairs. Nora's stomach twisted. There must be a mistake. That circuit doesn't even work. The younger assistant spoke softly. Ma'am, if he's struggling with writer's block, we can help. But disappearing never ends well. Not for him, not for you. Their words blurred in Nora's ears. She nodded mechanically, promised to pass the message, and closed the door. When the latch clicked, she leaned against it, heart hammering. The attic light again. The smell of brine drifted faintly down the stairs, unmistakable cold alive. She turned toward the ceiling. If the light was truly on, it meant one thing. Someone was up there, and they wanted her to know. The rain had stopped, but the house still dripped with silence. Nora stood at the bottom of the hallway stairs, clutching her flashlight. Every creak in the floor felt like a breath beneath her feet. For hours she had sat motionless after Sterling's visit, replaying his words. Attic light. Active phone signal. Daniel still working upstairs. Now it was night again. And she could not stand the not knowing. The pull string for the attic hatch dangled above her like a rope into another world. She reached for it. Her fingers trembled. The thin cord was coated in dust and something sticky salt again. She pulled. The wooden door groaned open, releasing a gust of air cold enough to sting her eyes. It smelled like seaweed, old paper, and faintly of something human skin sweat, years of trapped breath. She positioned the folding ladder each step, squealing under her weight. Her flashlight beam sliced upward, shaking slightly with her pulse. The first thing she saw was dust glittering like suspended snow. Then shapes emerged. Boxes draped with yellowed sheets, a rocking chair half buried beneath a tarp, and the familiar circular window. The lighthouse window, its glass fogged white from condensation. But there, in the farthest corner beyond the old trunk's light, a dim oil lamp flickered weakly on a wooden table, its flame thin but alive. The glass chimney was streaked with fingerprints. Around it lay a scattering of papers, jars of pencils, a cracked teacup, and beside it, a still warm plate. Nora's throat went dry. She stepped forward, scanning the room. A thin blanket was spread on the floor next to a tin bucket, a half-eaten apple, a water bottle. Someone had been here. Recently. She picked up one of the papers. The handwriting, flowing feminine, hauntingly familiar, covered the page. Sentences describing a woman locked in a tower by the sea, sending out signals through a narrow window. Her flashlight flickered. The air seemed to pulse. A faint sound rose behind her. The softest breath. Nora spun around. The lamp flame wavered, as though disturbed by movement. She aimed the light into the far shadows. The beam caught the outline of a small figure, a mannequin. No address form, draped with a white coat, damp at the edges. Her heart thudded painfully. She whispered, "Is anyone here?" Nothing. Just the crackle of the lamp. Then something metallic hit the floor, plink, a spoon rolling out from beneath a crate. Nora crouched, reaching to lift it. The spoon was wet. The droplets that clung to it smelled unmistakably of the sea. She rose, slowly scanning the space once more. The air had changed. It felt thicker, as if every object in the room was holding its breath. Her gaze fell on a small wooden sign, nailed to a beam above the window, nearly hidden by cobwebs. She brushed away the dust and read the faint engraving, "The lighthouse room. Do not enter." Her flashlight sputtered and died. The lamp guttered, flared, and then went out, plunging everything into black. Nora's heartbeat filled the void. She could hear water dripping somewhere close, rhythmic and deliberate, like footsteps receding. And then, from the dark corner where the blanket lay, came a whisper so faint it might have been her imagination. "Not again." Nora stumbled backward toward the ladder, gripping the rungs until splinters bit into her palms. She climbed down every creak, echoing like thunder. When her feet hit the floor, she slammed the hatch shut and leaned against the wall, shaking. There had been someone in that room, someone alive and terrified. The following night, the fog rolled in again, heavier than before, swallowing the house in a cocoon of gray. The lighthouse beam blinked faintly through the mist, a pulse in the darkness, steady, patient waiting. Nora could no longer pretend ignorance. She carried a lantern instead of a flashlight this time, its glass case glowing amber against her trembling hand. Her heart thudded like a second rhythm to the waves. She climbed the ladder slowly. Every rung moaned, each sound swallowed by the ocean's breath outside. When she pushed open the hatch, the air rushed out in a damp gust, not empty, but occupied. The oil lamp on the table was burning again. Someone had lit it. The papers she'd scattered before were stacked neatly. The half-eaten apple was gone, and on the chair beside the window sat a figure, small, thin shoulders, curled forward, wrapped in a white raincoat, streaked with gray stains. Nora froze halfway into the room. Her lantern flickered. "Who's there?" The figure turned slowly. The face that emerged from the dim light was pale, and sharp-edged eyes deep-set and glassy with fear. Long hair, once golden, now matted with salt, fell across her hollow cheeks. Her voice came out cracked, barely human. "Don't be afraid." Nora's throat tightened. "Who are you?" The woman blinked as if pulling her name from the shadows. "Eleanor. Shaw." The lantern nearly slipped from Nora's hand. She stumbled forward, words caught between disbelief and recognition. "That's impossible." "You died," Daniel said. The woman flinched at the name. Her lips trembled. "He told you that?" Nora nodded, too stunned to speak. Eleanor's breath shook. "I didn't die. He found me. After the accident, said he'd help me, that no one would believe my story, that I had to stay hidden. For you. For me," Nora whispered. "He said the world thought I was guilty," Eleanor rasped, staring down at her trembling hands. "But he promised if I stayed here, if I wrote for him, he'd protect you. Protect the family name." Nora's head spun. "Wrote for him." Eleanor nodded weakly toward the desk. "Every book, every word. He came at night, brought food paper ink, said the world loved his voice, but it was my prison that made his stories real." Nora felt the floor tilt beneath her. She looked around the manuscripts, the scratched initials, the blanket. The lighthouse room was not a sanctuary. It was a cell. Eleanor stood shakily, her hand gripping the chair for balance. I tapped the vents, sent signals, prayed the sea would carry them. "You heard me, didn't you?" "You came." Nora's eyes brimmed. "I did." But not soon enough. They stood facing each other. Two women bound by the same betrayal. One ghosted by lies, the other blinded by love. Then Eleanor whispered, "He's coming back soon. He always knows when I talk too much." The lantern flame guttered as the wind howled through the vent. Nora grabbed Eleanor's hands, cold, fragile, but real. "Not this time. You're leaving with me." Down below, the front door slammed open. Footsteps echoed, steady, deliberate, unmistakably Daniel's. Eleanor's eyes widened in terror. "He can't find me here." Nora turned toward the ladder, the lantern trembling in her grip. The sound of Daniel's voice drifted up the stairs, calm and dangerous. "Nora, who are you talking to?" Daniel's footsteps creaked up the attic ladder, slow, deliberate like a predator climbing toward its prey. The lantern light trembled across the walls, casting fractured shadows that danced over Eleanor's frightened face. Nora stepped in front of her, heart hammering. "Daniel," she said softly. "Stop right there." He emerged fully into the attic coat, damp from the sea fog, hair slicked back, eyes gleaming with something too calm to be sane. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Neither of you should." Eleanor's breath caught. "You said you were gone." Daniel's voice turned smooth, almost tender. "And yet here I am, as always, cleaning up what you can't keep quiet." Nora's voice cracked. "Who is she, Daniel? Tell me the truth." He looked at her, the mask slipping for a heartbeat. "You really don't know your father's mistake. The half-sister he kept hidden because she embarrassed him." Eleanor's hands shook. "You swore you'd never tell her." "I didn't have to," he said, stepping closer. "You two were bound to destroy each other eventually. It's what guilt does." Nora stood rigid. "You lied to me. You said she drowned." "I saved her." Daniel hissed, leaning in. "I pulled her from the rocks that night. She killed a man. Nora, her editor. She begged me for help, and I gave it. I gave her safety, shelter. And in return, she gave me everything else, her words, her talent, her silence." Eleanor's voice cracked through the air like thunder. "You used me." Daniel snapped his gaze to her. "I made you immortal. You think anyone would have read your sob stories without my name on them?" Nora stepped between them. "You imprisoned her. You built your career on her pain." Daniel's voice softened, disturbingly gentle. "I built our life, Nora. The house, the awards, the comfort you love, all of it came from her. From me keeping her secret. You should be thanking me." Nora's eyes glistened, the lantern's glow reflecting her tears. "You think this house is comfort? It's a tomb?" Eleanor's knees buckled, the weight of 30 years pressing down. "I wanted to go to the police, Daniel. You said you'd fix everything. You said you'd only hide me for a while." Daniel turned, his expression tightening. "You were hysterical. You would have ruined us all." Nora's voice rose, trembling with fury. "Us or you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward the round window, the lighthouse's beam washing across his face in pulses of white and shadow. For the first time, Nora saw the fear behind his calm. Eleanor straightened slowly, her voice hoarse but steady. "You don't control me anymore." Daniel turned sharply. "You don't get to speak like that in my house." "It's my story," Eleanor said, trembling but defiant. "And I'm taking it back." A gust of wind rattled the beams above them, scattering papers across the floor like fleeing birds. The lantern flickered, the light bending around Daniel's face, half in glow, half in darkness. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Nora whispered, "We're going to the police. Tonight." Daniel smiled faintly, the kind that carried both sadness and threat. "You'll destroy everything, Nora." "Maybe it deserves to be destroyed," she said. The lighthouse beam swept through the room one last time, cold, pure, merciless, illuminating the truth between them all. The attic had gone still again. The air felt bruised, heavy from everything that had been said, everything that could never be taken back. Nora sank to her knees beside Eleanor, the lantern's weak flame painting their faces gold and gray. Papers rustled softly around them, whispering fragments of stolen years. Eleanor trembled, her breath uneven. "You don't know what it's like," she murmured, staring at the wooden floor. Hearing footsteps every night, wondering if he'd lock the door again, if he'd take the pages away. I stopped counting the seasons. I only knew the sound of waves. Nora swallowed hard. You don't have to stay here anymore. Eleanor gave a faint laugh, dry, broken. I forgot how to be outside. Down below, the front door slammed. Daniel's car engine roared, fading into the distance. His voice lingered in her memory like smoke. I'll be back. Nora reached for Eleanor's hand. It was cold, calloused, trembling, but real. He won't touch you again, she said, steady now. Not while I'm breathing. For the first time, Eleanor lifted her eyes. The beam from the lighthouse swept across the round window, flooding the room in silver light. For a heartbeat, her face softened, not the ghost, but the sister. Do you hear it? Nora whispered. Eleanor nodded. The sea. No, Nora said. Freedom. Outside, the fog thinned. The beam turned once more across the glass, bright, defiant, like a promise whispered from the shore. Morning crept in through the fog like a bruise, healing too slowly. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a scene of confession. Nora moved carefully through each room, gathering everything Daniel had ever tried to bury. The notebook, the manuscripts with Eleanor's handwriting, the blueprint marked occupant, and the small lock of hair tied with red thread that she found in a drawer, evidence of a man obsessed with control. Eleanor sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the sea. Her pale fingers toyed with the edge of the teacup, but didn't drink. He'll come back, she whispered. He always does. Nora knelt beside her. Let him. This time we won't be hiding. She photographed everything, each page, each corner of the attic, the rusty lock, the sealed vent, even the fingerprints on the oil lamp. Every click of the camera felt like another nail in the coffin of his lies. When she finished, she called her lawyer friend, Avery Clark, who lived 2 towns over. I need you to contact the police, Nora said, voice steady, and the Coast Guard. There's been a crime for 30 years. On the other end of the line came silence. Then a quiet, I'll come right now. Hours later, the phone buzzed again. A message from Daniel. D. You don't understand what you're doing. Some truths drown for a reason. Her hand trembled, but she didn't reply. Instead, she held up her phone, recording the screen. Another piece of evidence. Eleanor looked up from the window, eyes wide with dread. He'll destroy us both. Nora shook her head, slipping the phone into her coat pocket. He already tried. Outside, the foghorn groaned like a wounded animal. Inside, the light through the porthole fell across the desk, a pale, unwavering line of truth. Nora whispered to herself, Let there be light. And the beam from the distant lighthouse answered steady and bright, like justice finally returning to shore. The knock came just after dawn. 3 sharp raps, official, certain. Nora opened the door to a gust of cold air and 2 officers standing beneath the dripping porch roof. Behind them, Avery Clark, her lawyer friend, nodded, once face pale from the drive. Mrs. Hale, the senior officer, said, We received your call. We're here to conduct a search and welfare check. The word welfare stung her. She stepped aside. Everything you need is upstairs. Within minutes, boots echoed across the floors. Flashlights swept the staircase, cutting through dust and old secrets. The attic hatch groaned open once more, but this time it was the law, not guilt, that climbed into the dark. Eleanor shrank into the corner chair, hands, shaking, eyes darting from light to shadow. I can't. Nora knelt beside her. You're safe now. They're not here for you. They're here because of you. From above came the sound of snapping gloves, the low murmur of officers documenting handwritten pages consistent with Ms. Shaw's penmanship. Lock reinforced from exterior. Residue on vents consistent with sea air intrusion, saltwater droplets. Each note was another piece of freedom. When the lead detective descended, his expression had hardened. Mrs. Hale, what you described checks out, There's enough to open a full investigation. He paused, eyes softening slightly. We'll find him. Nora nodded. Her phone buzzed at that exact moment, the shrill sound cutting through the house like a siren. Daniel. Her stomach knotted. She put the phone on speaker. Daniel, she said, voice steady but cold, they know. For a few seconds, only silence, then his low, calm voice filled the room. Nora, you shouldn't have done this. Done what? She snapped. Freed a woman you locked in a cage? You think they'll believe you? He asked softly. You think they'll understand what she did? What you're doing to me? Eleanor flinched at the sound of his voice, tears welling up. He's lying, she whispered. Nora stepped closer to the window, her reflection fractured in the round glass. You built your life on lies, and now it's crumbling. Come back, Daniel. Face what you've done. He gave a soft laugh, hollow, unsteady. The sea's calmer than Justice Nora. Maybe that's where I belong. The line went dead. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the mantel clock downstairs. Avery touched Nora's arm gently. We'll trace the call. He can't hide forever. But Nora wasn't listening. Her gaze drifted toward the lighthouse beam outside, sweeping slowly across the cliffs, searching as if the light itself were hunting for him. Eleanor whispered, He's going to the water, isn't he? Nora nodded. It's where all his stories ended. Down below, waves crashed harder against the rocks, echoing through the floorboards. The house trembled, as if remembering everything that had happened within its walls. Nora closed her eyes. Then that's where we'll end it, too. She turned to the officer. Get your boats ready. He won't disappear again. Outside, dawn broke across the sea, gray cold and merciless, and somewhere beyond the fog, the beam of the lighthouse swept across the water, catching for just a moment on a moving shape, a dark figure walking toward the cliffs. The storm arrived, as if summoned. Wind whipped the coast, the air thick with salt, and the electric scent of rain. Nora's headlights sliced through the fog, illuminating white spray crashing against black rock. Police cruisers lined the edge of the cliff. Red lights flashed like heartbeats against the roaring sea. Officers shouted over radios. Somewhere below, the waves pounded the shore in furious rhythm. Mrs. Hale, wait, the detective called, but Nora was already running. Her coat snapped behind her like a banner. Daniel stood at the edge of the cliff, framed by lightning. His figure was small against the storm, but his voice carried hoarse, deliberate final. You shouldn't have brought them here, Nora. She stepped closer, rain streaming down her face. You left me no choice. He laughed, ragged, almost broken. Do you think they'll believe this story? The mad husband, the ghost in the attic. They'll tear you apart too. The truth doesn't drown, Daniel, she said. You tried for 30 years. It's still breathing. He turned toward the sea. Lightning flashed again, his face, pale eyes, wild mouth trembling. I wrote with her pain, every page, every word. You loved those books, Nora. You loved me because of them. I loved a lie, she whispered, and it's ending tonight. For a moment, the storm seemed to pause. Then Daniel took a step closer to the edge. You don't understand her guilt, my sacrifice. It made us immortal. A shout came from behind. Police, don't move. Daniel didn't look back. You'll never understand what it means to bleed for your own art, he said quietly. Eleanor's voice cut through the wind. You didn't bleed for art. You bled me. Daniel froze. He turned. Eleanor stood behind Nora, frail but steady, her white coat clinging to her frame. Lightning flared her face, no longer ghost-like, but alive, defiant. Daniel's mouth opened, no words came. I wrote those stories to survive, Eleanor said. You turned them into your fame. His expression shattered. You wouldn't exist without me. Then maybe I'll disappear, she said. But not before you do. He lunged forward, slipping on the slick rock. Nora screamed, reaching out instinctively. Their hands brushed, but Daniel pulled away, one last flicker of pride. The next lightning flash lit the empty cliff edge. His silhouette vanished into the churning black sea below. For a few seconds, no one moved. Only the thunder spoke, rolling endlessly toward shore. Eleanor collapsed to her knees, sobbing, not in grief, but in release. Nora fell beside her, holding her tight. A searchlight from the Coast Guard swept over the waves, the white beam cutting across the storm like a divine blade. It passed over the water twice, then steadied on nothing but foam. The detective stepped forward quietly. "He's gone," he said. Nora nodded, tears mingling with rain. "No," she whispered. "He's finally where he belonged among his ghosts." The wind eased. The lighthouse beam rotated once more, steady, eternal. It washed over the sisters like absolution. Eleanor looked toward it, her voice barely a breath. "The light always finds the shore, doesn't it?" Nora squeezed her hand. "Always." And for the first time, the storm began to fade. By dawn, the storm had spent itself. The sea lay gray and heavy beneath a slow rising sun. Seagulls wheeled low over the water, their cries sharp and distant, like echoes of what had been lost. Nora sat by the kitchen window, wrapped in a wool blanket, the steam from her untouched tea curling through the pale morning light. Outside, the lighthouse beam flickered one last time before vanishing in the brightness of day. Eleanor moved quietly behind her, her thin frame steadier now, hair brushed and face washed clean. The white raincoat hung beside the door, dry at last. "They found him," Eleanor said softly. "The Coast Guard called, down by the rocks near Hollow Point." Nora nodded, but said nothing. Words felt like stones today, heavy, immovable. "The papers will talk," Eleanor continued. "They'll twist it. They'll call it tragedy, or madness, or romance." "They always do," Nora murmured. "But the truth doesn't belong to them anymore." Eleanor stepped closer to the window, watching the tide creep in, gentle, rhythmic. "I used to hate the sea," she said. "I thought it stole everything from me. My life, my voice, my name." Nora turned to her eyes, tired but kind. And now Eleanor smiled faintly. "Now I think it gave it back." A knock at the door startled them both. It was Avery carrying a folder. "Police documents, statements, the official end to 30 years of silence." Nora took it, but didn't open it. Instead, she walked to the desk, laid the folder beside the brown leather notebook, and whispered, "Let the record speak for itself." Eleanor gazed at the sunlight spreading across the floorboards. "I'm going to write again," she said. "But this time, under my real name." Nora looked toward the sea voice, low and steady. "Then write for both of us. Write until the light stays." They stood there for a long while, two women bound not by fear anymore, but by survival. The waves whispered against the rocks, the same rhythm that once carried an SOS. Now it sounded like home. 1 year later, the lighthouse still turned its steady rhythm over the gray Atlantic, though the old Hale house beneath it had changed. The walls were freshly painted, the attic window repaired, and the air no longer smelled of damp salt and secrets, only sea breeze and sunlight. A small wooden sign hung by the path leading to the cliff. "The Lighthouse Room," by Eleanor Shaw. Inside the house was quiet, except for the soft flutter of pages being turned. Nora sat in an armchair by the window, the morning sun spilling across her lap. The book was new, crisp ivory pages, bound in warm linen, embossed in silver. She traced the title with her fingertips. The Lighthouse Room. The world had read it now. The truth was no longer hidden in the walls, but written in light. Critics called it a haunting confession, a triumph of courage and sisterhood. Readers left flowers by the sea. Some cried. Others said it made them believe in redemption again. On the first page beneath the dedication, the words stood alone in Eleanor's graceful handwriting. For my sister, who followed the light. Nora closed the book gently, tears welling, but her smile steady. She looked up as Eleanor entered, stronger her steps, sure, her hair short, now silver, catching in the light. They're sending the first edition to the Library of Congress, Eleanor said softly. They said it's not just literature, it's testimony. Nora rose, walking to the window with her. The horizon gleamed clean and endless. It always was, she said. You just had to speak it. Eleanor nodded, eyes glistening. Do you ever think about him? Nora hesitated, then looked toward the cliffs. Sometimes, she admitted, but not with hate. He built walls. We built windows. Outside, a group of visitors lingered on the trail, taking photos of the lighthouse. A child pointed at the beam as it swept across the waves and shouted, "Look, it's blinking! Hello!" Eleanor laughed softly. Maybe it is. They walked outside together. The wind tugged at their coats, carrying the scent of salt and wildflowers. The lighthouse beam glided across them, warm and pale, like a blessing from something that had once been cruel, but now learned gentleness. Eleanor turned to Nora. It's strange, she said. For years I thought I was the ghost of this house, but maybe it was the house that was haunting me. Nora smiled. Not anymore. The sisters stood on the edge of the cliff, the ocean breathing below them, the beam passing over their faces, one final time. When it moved on, they didn't look back. They had become their own light. How did this story touch you? Tell us in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. If it moved your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Tap the so you won't miss our next emotional story. And before you go, click on the end screen to discover more powerful, heartwarming tales waiting just for you. See you in the next story.